this video we'll continue looking at basic substitutions. This time we're going to be exploring secondary dominants. A secondary dominant is generally a 5-chord, slightly out of context to a sequence. In a normal 2 minor 7, 5 7, 1 major 7, the 2 chord, which here is a D minor 7, would lead into a G7. But here you find a D7 before the G7. So we look at it almost as a 5 chord. Remember, D7 is the dominant chord in the key of G. If we look again at a diatonic turnaround, here's a 1 major 7, 6 minor 7, 2 minor 7, 5 7 sequence, as we looked at earlier in the course. We could instead create a secondary dominant of the 2 minor 7 by chromatically altering the 6 minor 7 to a dominant chord. This means that the A7 is now functioning as a 5-7 chord in D, even though it doesn't actually resolve to D major. Looking at the chords from the major scale, there's only one dominant 7 chord, the one built on the 5th scale degree. So, if we find another dominant chord in a progression which doesn't relate to the tonal center around it, we need to find another way to express it in Roman numerals. You'll see that for the second chord, we've indicated that the dominant moves towards chord 2. We can indicate this even more clearly by writing the tonal center we're currently in. G7 is the 5-7 of C major, so therefore bar 2 of this sequence borrows all its harmonic information from C major. Let's look at how secondary dominants work in a well-known tune. This tune is in B flat, specifically B flat major 7. Let's find one, a secondary dominant. Here's a first one. The E flat 7 is 5-7 in A flat major. It's a secondary dominant. Here's another one. But compared to the next chord, this looks like a tritone sub. So is it a secondary dominant? Well, here's a big table which looks confusing. Bear with me. Let's look at the table and look at the A flat 7. If it is a tritone sub, it must have come from somewhere. In this case, it must have been D7. But why would D7 be in the sequence in the first place? Well, D7 is a secondary dominant to G7, so it should have been secondary dominated from a diatonic chord. Forgive the description, dominated isn't really a thing, it sounds good. In this case, the original diatonic sequence could have been 2 minor 7, which links to the G7. So if we start from the top of that block, you could think of it like this. Start with a D minor 7, then do a secondary dominant substitution. And now the chord is a dominant, you can make it into a tritone sub, because we know from the last video that the guide tones will be the same on the tritone sub, and then you have the actual sequence. Here's another secondary dominant which doesn't resolve to its major root, although it does have dominant harmony. So, remember our big table from the tune before? Well, how about this tune? Look at how these chords could have originally worked as an extended diatonic turnaround sequence in B flat major. Rather than a table, the top chords are what could have been the original chord sequence, which give you an extended diatonic turnaround in B flat major. Then Let's see what's taken place to get these original chords here. With a combination of secondary dominants and tritone subs, a much more interesting chord sequence is created out of a simple turnaround, which gives it a really nice descending feel. Let's look at the Dameron turnaround, so cool because of the last two bars of this tune, Ladybird. Let's take a closer look. The last two bars are known as the Dameron turnaround, which is a slight deviation on the normal tritone substitution and dominant sequences. Let's have a look at some great animations. A normal turnaround would be this. After making all the chords, apart from the root secondary dominants, you have this. See how they all become dominants, 5 of 5s. And then, with all the chords, you then make them all tritone substitutions, apart from the root. And then, finally, Tad Dameron, in his wisdom, makes all the sub 5/7 chords, so all the dominant 7 chords, into major 7s. That's known as the Dameron turnaround. In the next video, we'll start looking at minor key harmony and modes and chords in minor keys.